What if your neighbor's nightmare could get you killed? What if the fantasies of a troubled child could lead you to the gallows? This isn't the plot of a horror movie. It was the terrifying reality for the people of colonial Massachusetts in 1692. A single spark of fear in a small, isolated village ignited a firestorm of accusation, paranoia, and death that would leave an indelible stain on American history. We call them the Salem Witch Trials. But was this a simple case of mass hysteria, a community losing its collective mind, or was it something more sinister? Was it judicial murder, sanctioned by the highest authorities and fueled by personal vendettas? Today, we put the most infamous witch hunt in American history on the stand. Welcome to History on Trial. Our story begins not in Salem town, the bustling port, but in the small, insular farming community of Salem Village. The year is 1692. The New England winter is harsh, a time of bone-chilling cold, long nights, and isolation. To them, this wilderness was not just untamed nature. It was the devil's territory, a place where evil lurked, and they were a small flicker of God's light in a vast, encroaching darkness. Their lives were governed by a strict, unyielding religious code. They believed the devil was a real, tangible presence, constantly seeking to undermine their city upon a hill. This ever-present fear was compounded by real-world anxieties. The colony was still reeling from a recent, brutal war with the Native Americans. A new royal charter had weakened the Puritans' political autonomy. Smallpox epidemics were a constant threat, and within Salem Village itself, bitter disputes over land, property lines, and church leadership had sown deep divisions among neighbors. The community was a powder keg of anxiety, resentment, and religious fervor, just waiting for a spark. That spark came from the home of the village minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. In January of 1692, his 9-year-old daughter, Betty Parris, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, began to exhibit terrifying and inexplicable behaviors. They would scream uncontrollably, contort their bodies into unnatural positions, throw objects and complain of being pinched and pricked by invisible forces. They would crawl under furniture and make strange guttural sounds. It was a terrifying spectacle for which their devout Puritan world had no medical explanation. When traditional prayers and remedies failed, a local doctor, William Griggs, was called. Unable to find any physical cause for the girl's afflictions, he delivered a diagnosis that would change everything. The cause, he declared, was not natural. The evil hand was upon them. In the Puritan mind, this meant only one thing: witchcraft. The devil had found a way into Salem Village, and he was using his earthly disciples, witches, to torment these innocent children. The question was no longer if there was witchcraft, but who was the witch. The pressure mounted on the afflicted girls. Day after day, magistrates and ministers pressed them. Who torments you? Who is it that bewitches you? At first the girls named no one, but the torment continued, and the pressure was relentless. Finally, at the end of February, they pointed their fingers. They named 3 women: Tituba, the Parris family's enslaved servant from the Caribbean; Sarah Good, a destitute and homeless beggar; and Sarah Osborne, an elderly, bedridden woman known for her infrequent church attendance and disputes over an inheritance. Think about these first 3 accused. Could they have chosen more perfect targets? Tituba was an outsider, a slave with different cultural and religious practices. Sarah Good was a social pariah, forced to beg for charity and known for muttering under her breath when turned away. Sarah Osborne was unpopular and had challenged social norms by attempting to control her own inheritance. None of them had the social standing, the friends, or the power to defend themselves. They were vulnerable, the easiest scapegoats for a community desperate for answers. From February 29th to March 1st, Magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin began their examination of the accused in the village meeting house. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne vehemently denied the charges, but it was useless. As they spoke, the afflicted girls in the audience would writhe and scream, claiming the specters of the accused women were tormenting them right there in the courtroom. This spectral evidence to claim that a witch could send their spirit, or specter, to harm others was considered valid proof. How could anyone possibly defend themselves against a crime that was, by its very nature, invisible to everyone but the accuser? The turning point, the moment that poured fuel on the fire, was the confession of Tituba. After initially denying the accusations, she was likely subjected to intense coercion, possibly including physical violence from Reverend Parris. She changed her story. She not only confessed to being a witch but spun a fantastical tale that confirmed the Puritans' darkest fears. She spoke of signing the devil's book, of a black dog, a red cat, and a yellow bird. She claimed there was a coven of witches in Salem Village, and that Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were her sisters in the craft. She described a tall man from Boston, cloaked in black, who was the devil himself, urging them to serve him. Tituba's confession was a bombshell. It transformed the situation from a case against 3 outcast women into a full-blown conspiracy of evil. It validated the court's proceedings, confirmed the existence of a demonic plot against Salem, and created an urgent need to hunt down the other unnamed witches in the coven. For the magistrates, it was proof. For the community, it was a terrifying confirmation that the devil truly walked among them, and for anyone who might be accused next, it established a horrifying precedent: deny the charges, and face the gallows. Or confess, name others, and you might be spared. The hysteria exploded. The circle of accusers expanded beyond Betty Parris and Abigail Williams to include other young women and girls in the village, most notably Ann Putnam Jr., whose family was a powerful force in the pro-Parris faction of the village. The accusations began to fly, moving beyond the socially marginalized to ensnare respectable church members. Martha Corey, a pious and well-regarded woman, was accused after she publicly expressed skepticism about the girls' claims. Rebecca Nurse, an elderly and universally respected matriarch, was arrested, to the shock of the entire community. If women like Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse could be witches, then anyone could. The stories in the courtroom theatrics became more and more dramatic. The afflicted girls acted as a chorus, their convulsions and screams providing a terrifying soundtrack to the proceedings. They would claim to be bitten, choked, or tempted by the specters of the accused. They claimed to see the devil's book being offered. When an accused person looked at them, they would fall to the floor in agony. It was a horrifying interactive drama, and the magistrates, particularly John Hathorne, seemed to accept it all as undeniable fact. His questioning was not that of an impartial judge, but of a prosecutor convinced of the defendant's guilt from the outset. Why were these girls so convincing? What was driving them? Historians and psychologists have debated this for centuries. Were they truly bewitched? Were they suffering from a form of conversion disorder or PTSD brought on by the traumas of frontier life? Was it a conscious fraud, a power trip for a group of girls who, in their rigid society, had no voice or agency? Some have even proposed the theory of ergotism, a poisoning from a fungus that can grow on rye bread, causing muscle spasms, vomiting, and hallucinations. While intriguing, the ergot theory doesn't fully explain the calculated and targeted nature of the accusations. The most likely answer is a complex combination of factors: a genuine belief in witchcraft, a few initial fits that garnered them immense attention, and then a conscious, escalating fraud fueled by the power they suddenly wielded over the adult world. By May of 1692, the local jails were overflowing with accused witches. The colony's new governor, William Phips, arrived from England and, facing a crisis, established a special court of Oyer and Terminer II here and determined to handle the cases. This court was presided over by judges like William Stan, a man with no legal training who was utterly convinced of the witch's guilt and a firm believer in the validity of spectral evidence. This court was a legal nightmare. The accused were treated as guilty until proven innocent. They were denied legal counsel. They were not allowed to present evidence in their own defense. The testimony of the afflicted girls, often contradictory and fantastical, was treated as gospel. While testimony on behalf of the accused was dismissed, the physical examinations for a witch's teat or devil's mark, any mole or blemish that was insensitive to the touch, were humiliating and subjective. The entire legal process was designed not to find truth, but to confirm a pre-existing belief. The first to be tried, and the first to be hanged, was Bridget Bishop on June 10th. She was an easy target, a tavern owner who wore clothes considered too flamboyant by Puritan standards and had been accused of witchcraft years earlier. Her conviction set a deadly precedent. Throughout the summer, the trials continued, and the gallows on Proctor's Ledge saw victim after victim. Rebecca Nurse was initially found not guilty by her jury, but the judges and the courtroom spectators reacted with such outrage that the jury was forced to reconsider, and they condemned her to death. Reverend George Burroughs, a former minister of Salem Village, was accused of his hanging. He recited the Lord's Prayer, perfectly, something a witch was supposedly unable to do, which unsettled the crowd. But the influential minister Cotton Mather assured them from horseback that the devil could take the form of an angel of light, and the execution proceeded. One of the most brutal episodes involved Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer. Knowing the court would convict him and seize his property, leaving his family with nothing, he refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. The penalty for refusing to stand for trial was peine forte et dure, crushing by stone. For 2 days, Corey lay in a field with heavy stones placed upon his chest. His interrogators demanded a plea, but his only response was, "More weight." He died under the immense pressure, but because he was never convicted, his farm passed to his sons. His defiance was a testament to the madness that had consumed Salem. As the summer turned to autumn, the accusations began to spiral out of control. The accusers, emboldened by their power, began to name increasingly prominent and well-connected individuals. They accused the wife of the Reverend John Hale of Beverly, a man who had initially supported the trials. They even, allegedly, named the wife of Governor Phips himself. This was a critical mistake. When the accusers began to point fingers at the colony's elite, those in power began to question the very process they had championed. It was one thing to hang a poor beggar or an outspoken tavern owner, but the wife of a respected minister, the governor's own lady. Simultaneously, a growing number of influential voices in the colony began to speak out against the proceedings. The most significant was Reverend Increase Mather. the president of Harvard College and one of the most respected ministers in New England. In his sermon, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, he powerfully argued against the use of spectral evidence. He declared, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned." His words carried immense weight and provided the intellectual and theological cover for the political authorities to end the trials. In October 1692, Governor Phipps, spurred by Mather's arguments and the increasingly unbelievable accusations, ordered a halt to the proceedings of the Court of Oya and Termina. He dissolved the court and established a new superior court of judicature to handle the remaining cases. Crucially, this new court was instructed not to admit spectral evidence. Without the fantastical tales of the afflicted girls to rely on, the cases fell apart. Of the 56 individuals brought before this new court, the vast majority were acquitted. Phipps eventually pardoned all those remaining in prison. The Salem Witch Trials were over. By the time the madness subsided, 19 men and women had been hanged on Proctor's Ledge. Giles Corey had been pressed to death. At least 5 others, including Sarah Osborne, had died in the squalid conditions of the prison. The community of Salem was shattered, consumed by guilt, shame, and recrimination. In the years that followed, apologies and attempts at reconciliation began. In 1697, the General Court ordered a day of fasting and prayer for the tragedy that had befallen the colony. Samuel Sewell, one of the judges, stood before his church congregation in Boston as his minister read his public confession, taking the blame and shame of the trials upon himself and praying for forgiveness. In 1711, the colony passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of many of the accused and granted financial compensation to their heirs. It was an admission, however belated, that a terrible injustice had been done. So, we return to our question, mass hysteria or murder? The answer, as is so often the case in history, is not simple. It began with genuine fear and what might be described as a localized hysteria among a small group of girls. A hysteria that resonated with the deep-seated anxieties of their community. But it did not stay that way. It was seized upon by adults and institutionalized by a legal system that abandoned its principles. The magistrates and judges ignored due process, admitted spectral evidence they should have known was unverifiable, and bullied defendants. They turned a spark of panic into a state-sanctioned killing machine. They transformed delusion into murder by hanging. The Salem Witch Trials stand as a chilling cautionary tale. They are a monument to the dangers of extremism, religious intolerance, and the failure of critical thinking. They remind us how easily fear can be weaponized, how quickly a society can turn on its most vulnerable members when it feels threatened, and how a legal system, our supposed shield against injustice, can become the very instrument of that injustice. The names of the accusers have largely been forgotten, but the names of the victims, Bridget Bishop, Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, George Burroughs, Giles Corey, and so many others, are etched into history as a permanent reminder of what happens when reason fails and hysteria is allowed to sit on the judge's bench. Examining these dark chapters of our past is crucial to understanding ourselves. The dynamics of fear, scapegoating, and witch hunts have not disappeared from the human experience. If you believe, as we do, that we must put history on trial to learn its most vital lessons, then please subscribe to History on Trial and join our community of critical thinkers. Click the bell icon so you never miss an episode. And in the comments below, let us know what other historical event do you think deserves to be put on the stand. Thank you for watching.